Let us prepare ourselves. So if you put your hand over your eyes, I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
Now your hand over your ears, I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
Now if you just put your hand over your heart, just extend out your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
The spiritual truth that I'm working with today is that we were born into two worlds. We were born into heaven and earth. We were born into form and formlessness. We were born into being spiritual beings and spiritual doings. You know, I'm working with a little book. And, you know, whenever I have a challenge in my life, I like to go to one of my books. And whenever I do that, then you get the benefit of my challenge and of my book. And I'm working with a book called A New Earth. Most of you are familiar with it. Many of you have purchased it, and some of you have read it. And here's my concern about books like this. These books were really designed to be studied. They weren't designed to be read once and then put away. They're books that really, you get them deeper and deeper every time you read these things. So it's kind of like the Four Agreements or any of those books that we need to keep dusting them off and reading them. And one of the things that I like about this book is that it asks us to stop focusing so much on being a spiritual doing so that we can strengthen our spiritual being in this life. In the past, I've called this book a peace manifesto. I've called it a blueprint for being alive. I've called it a workbook for living in the present moment right now. And I stand by all of those descriptions. But now I recognize it as a mirror to help us look in past those wrappings that we've wrapped ourselves around in this life. And so that we can look past those wrappings and see the land of pure potentiality that is within us, that untouched field that is within each and every one of us. You know, out of effect and into cause, out of our body and into our soul, out of form and into formlessness. And we look closely enough at that mirror, you can see how to travel between heaven and earth really effortlessly with a lot of joy in our heart. This book tells us how to manifest a belief by our founder, Ernest Holmes. You know, our founder, Ernest Holmes, wrote an essay called What We Believe. It's 13 beliefs. What I've done to those 13 beliefs is I pare those down and put them in my own language for the 4 things I say every single Sunday morning about what kind of church this is. But every once in a while, we really should visit the longer versions of these beliefs. And the belief that I want to just hit upon today is the one that says we believe the ultimate goal of life is the complete emancipation from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is surely to be attained by all in our life. Eckhart Tolle says discord is a result of living in our egos, and he defines the ego as attachment to form. Now we want to be careful here because sometimes when we hear that, we think it's attachment, we think it's the form itself. Ego is not the form itself. We want you to be happy with your forms. We want you to be happy with your house. We want you to be happy with your car. We want you to be happy with all your toys. We want you to be happy with your spouse and your children. All of those are form. We want you to be happy with all of those. But we also recognize that forms can be moving targets. And when they move away from us, that's when discord happens in our life. You know, our spouse wants to go back to school or to start a new project that we don't have any interest in, and sometimes we become jealous or fear sets in that we're not going to be enough or we're not going to grow together or all that stuff, and then discord starts in. Sometimes our job descriptions change and we think we're not valued enough on the planet, and discord begins to happen. Sometimes that brilliant son of ours who always said he wanted to be an architect comes home from college and says he wants to be a whitewater river guide, and discord sets in, disappointment sets in. What Eckhart Tolle says is emancipation of every nature, emancipation of discord of every nature can be had by simply leaving the land of ego and entering and staying in the land of spirit. See, emancipation of discord, from discord is not about getting somebody or a bunch of somebodies to do the right thing. It's about getting everybody to stop reacting to what anybody else is doing. Is this a new concept? No. It's new wineskin. It's not a new concept. You know, the Buddha's entire teaching is based on this idea of non-attachment to form. Byron Katie's work centers largely around loving what is right now, not worrying about how we can control change. She says we'll never get a dog to meow or a cat to bark on this planet. We got to stop trying that. Ernest Holmes puts it this way, our founder. For those of you who are visiting, we're a church that really studies the work of a great philosopher named Ernest Holmes, and he says this. He says, stop wasting your time at the place of effect and stay in cause. Know that your abundance is not about money. It's not about your bank account. It's not about how rich or poor your parents are. It's about consciousness. Harmony is not about your spouse's communication skills. It's about consciousness in your life. Eckhart Tolle takes this deeper, this whole consciousness, whole idea of staying out of cause, out of effect and into cause. And I want to just stop here and say, this is one of the reasons that I believe in this teaching. This is one of the reasons that I'm a religious scientist. This is one of the reasons that I teach and study the foundations of science of mind. Because Ernest Holmes said, it will always stay open at the top. Know that I have done the best I can to take all of these ancient teachings and more and package them in a way that will make it understood. And so his writings in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s while he was alive was his best guess, was his best way. And I love the way he puts things, and I love the way he teaches it. But he said there'll be other people who come along and make it even more clear. The Joe Dispenzas, the Eckhart Tolles, the many, many people who have come behind Ernest Holmes to take these ancient spiritual principles that have been around from the beginning of time. They didn't start with any of these teachers. They've been around from the beginning of time. And teach them in a way that is more refined even. Eckhart Tolle would not disagree with the statement that consciousness is cause, but he invites us to go deeper into the formless state, a state that he calls uncontaminated substratum. Uncontaminated substratum. Now look, that's simply a fancy kind of quasi-medical word, kind of quasi-religious word, just a fancy word for perfection. That's all it means. Uncontaminated substratum is the perfection that is you. Not to cause change on the outside. He says, don't enter into this uncontaminated substratum to change anybody else, but to allow your joy to be felt, because that's where your joy lives. It lives in that place. He says, our joy cannot come to us. It has to emanate from us in our life. Now, the beauty of this book, for me, is that you don't have to go to an ashram. You don't have to go away in order to do it. You can do it right here. So you don't have to go to an ashram or where there's no golf course, or because I wouldn't be going, or where there's no Starbucks, or where there's no movie houses, or where there's no anything. He says, look, it's all around us. It's everywhere. It's kind of like the wisdom of Thich Nhat Hanh, who said you have to walk the green, green grass of earth, not be up in the clouds in our life. See, we all want to be able to travel freely from heaven to earth, from heaven to earth, without ever going back to hell in our life. So how do we do that? Because we're a practical church. How do we do that? We do it by allowing the diminishment of ego. And I love that term, diminishment of ego. See, we are not a tribe that smashes the ego, annihilates the ego, destroys the ego. We don't do anything. We think the ego is important, but we don't want to smash it or annihilate it. But we do want to put it back into a perspective in which it's not driving us, but Spirit's driving us in our life. See, ego is always on guard against any kind of perceived diminishment in our life. Eckhart Tolle says this. He said, we each individually have these little ego repair mechanisms that are in us. And I kind of see them as, remember the old Pac-Man where they just go around and eat everything in front of them? Well, I think the ego repair mechanism that is alive within each one of us simply spits out repairs to our ego when we feel like it's been damaged. So if somebody blames me or criticizes me, my ego thinks it's damaged, and my little ego repair mechanism goes to work to begin to help me act with self-justification, helps me act with blaming, helps me act with excuses. And whether I'm right or wrong is irrelevant to my ego. It's much more interested in looking good and feeling good than in the truth. So when our boss suggests an improvement, our ego thinks it's a statement about who we are, not about what we're doing or what we're not doing. So I want to invite you this week, try to look for ways in which you might be able to diminish your ego simply by looking at how attached you are to a form. Whether that form is a human being or a situation or a car or a house or anything. Just ask yourself. You don't have to do anything. Just ask yourself, am I attached to this form? And is my little ego repair mechanism hot on the job because it looks like I might lose it in my life? Because here's the thing. When we look at our ego and we can step back and say, you know what? Nothing real has been diminished. Even if you've gone through a divorce recently and you think that you've been diminished from that, love within you has not been diminished. Your love of wanting to be a partner has never been diminished. And it can come again. Maybe with a different face, but it can come again. Now look, I don't mean that anybody here should be a doormat. Nobody gets to be a doormat. Why? Because we are God-informed. And God is no doormat in our life. But we do, and sometimes we need to tell people, you know what, back up. Just back up. And it's okay. But when we do that, we don't tell them to back up because we're mad at them. We don't tell them to back up because they're bad in our life. We do it with love in our heart. We don't make judgments. We just say, this isn't working for me. Please back up. Like the bears. Look, it doesn't work for me to cross with you. So back up. I'll back up. We'll go our separate ways. Sometimes we need to do that. But the power to be able to tell somebody to back up comes from a diminishment of ego, not from, and from our detachment to form. That's where the true power comes from. It's why kindergarten teachers whisper. Do you ever notice that? Some of you might be a kindergarten teacher. They whisper. They don't shout. They don't make anybody bad. They just whisper what they want. And people begin to see it's a powerful way of communicating in our lives. So you remember, every event you have is transitory. Everything is transitory. That ugly, didn't mean ass, it just meant the ugly carpet. That ugly carpet in our, it's gone. It's transitory, gone. Beautiful floor. Thank you all very much. I want to kind of illustrate this by sharing with you a story that is in this little book, Eckhart Tolle's. According to the ancient Sufi story, there lived a king in some Middle Eastern land who was continuously torn between happiness and despondency. The slightest thing would cause him great upset or provoke an intense reaction, and his unhappiness would quickly turn into disappointment and despair. A time came when the king finally got tired of himself and of life, and he began to seek a way out. Hasn't that happened to you? You're just sick of yourself, and you just think, I got to figure out this because I'm sick of myself. I don't know if you've been there. I have certainly been there in my life. He sent for a wise man who lived in his kingdom and who was reputed to be enlightened. When the wise man came, the king said to him, I want to be like you. Can you give me something that will bring balance, serenity, wisdom into my life? I will pay any price you ask. The wise man said, I may be able to help you, but the price is so great your entire kingdom would not be sufficient payment. Therefore, it will be a gift to you if you will honor it. The king gave us assurances, and the wise man left. A few weeks later, he returned and handed the king an ornate box carved in jade. The king opened the box and found a simple gold ring inside. Some letters were inscribed on the ring. Their inscription read, This too will pass. What is the meaning of this? Asked the king. The wise man said, Wear this ring always. Whatever happens, before you call it good or bad, touch this ring and read the inscription. That way you will always be at peace. This too will pass. It's transitory in our life. It's a helpful hint to let us know that life is impermanent and that freedom comes from acknowledging that impermanence in our life. You're not hooked anymore. You don't need to be hooked to what your boss is doing in your life. You don't need to be hooked to what your spouse is doing in your life. You don't need to be hooked into what your kids are doing in your life. You no longer need to be hooked to that childhood trauma that you've been dragging around and talking about and talking about and talking about it. You can unhook yourself from that because it happened. It's impermanent. It's done. You simply don't need to identify with form. Eckhart Tolle says this: with detachment comes another dimension, and it's called inner space. Inner space. Inner space has no language. It has no form. It's the space where your happiness resides. Deep happiness. It doesn't see, that inner space doesn't see an external cause. Here is the interesting thing. Sometimes that inner space is touched most deeply if we leave our thinking mind alone and we just allow our right brain, our feeling side, to be receptive to what is out there, to touch our inner space in a deep way. I don't know where it comes from for you, but you've all experienced it, I know. You've been walking down the street and a smell might happen, and you weren't thinking about that smell, it just happened, and it touched something within you. A piece of music touched something within you. Without thinking about it, you just saw it, and it went straight to your heart. It didn't go to your mind. So while I was in Canada, I called my assistant, Rosie Camarena, and I said, Rosie, can you make me a 90-second video of images that you see with your heart before you see it with your mind? You're not thinking about it, you're just allowing it to touch your heart. So Steve, can we show that?
See your face in every sunrise. So many ways I dream of those eyes, and you are my sky. You are beautiful when you voice says to me that everything will be okay today. whispers to me all your secrets quietly. Gently
I encourage us all to do two things this week. First, every time you get your feelings hurt or you want to react to somebody, ask yourself, am I attached to the form of what just happened, either the person or the situation with just what happened? And is there a possibility I might be able to see through the eyes of my spirit and not through the eyes of my ego? And I already forgot what the second thing is. So. Oh no, the second thing is look for images that just pass your thinking mind and touch your heart this week. And spend a minute wallowing in it. Spend a minute tarrying there. Really begin to see what it feels like and pay attention to it.